Welcome aboard, Trailblazer, to another episode of the weekly Fashion Gazette, the show where we get into the nitty-gritty details of your favorite characters' visual designs and explore the good, the bad, and sometimes the most stylish takes on fashion and design. Today on the show we have Dan Heng, or more specifically we have his Super Saiyan 4 awakened form, the Imbibitor Lunae, the once all-powerful leader of the Vidyadhara. Dan Heng now inherits the power of the Azure Dragon, but with great power comes...
You dare finish that sentence! Don't do it! I'm sick of it!
There is a lot of heart put into this character, and I for one have always had a soft spot for Dan Heng and his design. But before we get into all that jazz, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below so that the almighty algorithm might hear my prayer. And with that, let's jam.
This is my original appearance, that of the Vidyadhara.
The Vidyadhara are a race of ancient species that are said to be descendants of immortal beings. Their lifespans tend to typically be around 600 to 700 years before they eventually molt into an egg, rehatching and living once more, but as a different person. They cannot reproduce, rather their species goes through an endless cycle of reincarnation. And this specific idea of reincarnation is actually very similar to one of the core philosophies of Buddhism. Brought over from India and spanning all the way to China, Buddhism is the prominent Eastern philosophy that embraces the concepts of karma and the continuous cycle of rebirth. What makes this relevant to Imibitor Lunae is just how much Buddhism influences his design.
All remains as it did yesterday.
Take for example the beads on his waist. You've probably seen these in every Exorcist anime, and they do have a name. They're called mala beads, and were meant to help Buddhists focus the mind during meditation. Hanged with them, you can also find Ofura talismans, which are also commonly found in Exorcist anime and Japanese Buddhist temples, and are considered to be imbued with the power of deities. Even the silhouette of his clothing seems to be inspired by a style of Buddhist robes called kasaya. This silhouette could very well be a coincidence thanks to Hoyoverse's love for asymmetrical design, but there is a consistent theme here, especially when you take into account just how much Buddhist philosophies are reflected on in Dan Heng's own story. We already mentioned the Vidyadhara cycle of rebirth, but there's also the idea of karma. Karma is the belief that all the good and bad things that you do in one life affect how good or bad your future lives will be. Essentially, your reincarnation will reap what you sow, and every individual is born with karma from their previous life. This is a very central conflict in Dan Heng's story, as he is very literally forced to pay for the crimes of his previous reincarnation, Dan Feng. It can become a very muddy area that ponders over the cycle of rebirth. If Dan Heng is the reincarnation of Dan Feng, are they really the same person? And as such, should the son pay for the father's sin? But if Dan Heng shares the same memories as Dan Feng, is one lifetime of suffering enough to appease the misdeeds of a previous life? By pondering these murky questions, you will eventually arrive at your own answer and thus achieve what we call enlightenment, one of the ultimate pursuits of Buddhism. In Buddhism, there are many representations and symbols of enlightenment. An example of one such symbol is the moon, which we can find in Imbibitor Lunae's splash art and clothing. However, this is far from the only symbol of enlightenment in his design.
The Vidyadhara that reside on Xianzhou received a blessing from the Permanence, our dragon ancestor. On the Luofu, we wield a magic known as Cloud Hymn that allows us to manipulate water and control the rains.
The first difference you probably notice between base human Dan Heng and his Imbibitor Lunae form are the green horns that stem from his head. These are specifically fashioned after the horns found on Eastern dragons, and there's actually quite a difference between how Eastern and Western cultures depict dragons. The dragon in the Western world was an evil creature of greed that hoarded treasure in the form of gold and riches, whereas in the East, the dragon was a deity that protected treasure in the form of knowledge and enlightenment. They sound similar, but it's a change of perspective that makes all the difference. In ancient China, people lived mainly on agriculture. The rain and the wind played an important role in their day-to-day lives, hence they believed that there was something powerful controlling the rain and thunder. These powerful deities of nature came to be portrayed as dragons, and were said to live in great bodies of water such as rivers, lakes, and oceans. And since their abodes were deep in water, they became a source of knowledge and fertility that guarded the immense riches of the earth. Just by observing this, we can already note many parallels between Eastern dragons and Dan Heng's role as Imbibitor Lunae. We see him control large bodies of water in the story, and his idol has him summoning the rain, showing his control over water just like the aforementioned Eastern dragon. There is also the fact that he was tasked with guarding the ambrosial armor, something very important to the Luofu, and a task that could only be given to a very powerful guardian deity. We also observe a dragon ornament placed as the center of his waist, and all the hanging articles of his design have a scale pattern that is reminiscent of a dragon's texture. In Buddhism, there are two types of dragons. The first is the brown dragon of the autumn equinox, who is associated with the fall harvest. The other is the green dragon of the east, associated with the spring equinox. This is relevant to Imbibitor Lunae's design in view of the fact that this dragon is commonly referred to as the azure dragon of the east. Now, because of the vast influence of dragons in Eastern culture, they have been associated with many things. However, the azure dragon is more specifically associated with the following: the color green, the heavens, the wind, the east, the rain, wood, and yang energy. Outside of wood, we can see all of these in play in Dan Heng's design, with the only thing we haven't mentioned yet being the yang energy. Yang energy is part of a very well-known Chinese philosophical concept called yin and yang. This concept, put simply, implies that everything in life has a duality, be it male, female, light, dark, positive, negative, yin or yang. And these two forces of yin and yang are believed to be both complementary and contrasting principles. Each makes up for what the other lacks, and the wholeness of the world would be incomplete if either of them were to overpower each other. As it happens, Dan Heng uses an orb in combat that looks like the yin-yang symbol. You can see it in his spear and also whenever he attacks with the azure dragon, as if the dragon is being directed by these philosophical teachings of yin-yang. This is actually very fitting, as most Buddhist dragons are often depicted with a jewel in their paw, representing the wisdom and teachings of Buddha. The dragon can then control the weather by squeezing the jewel to produce dew, rain, or even downpours when clenched tightly, thus coming full circle, as dragons bring prosperity to lands as protective forces that guard the ultimate treasure known as the wisdoms of Buddha. Hence, they are represented as symbols of enlightenment in Buddhist teachings. But as prominent as the dragon may be in Imbibitor Lunae's design, there is another symbol of enlightenment that holds a powerful, and in my opinion, a much more personal meaning to Dan Heng.
My previous life is like a faint shadow, hardly visible, yet following me wherever I go. It's hard to describe the feeling, but one thing is for certain. I am nobody's shadow.
Throughout IL Dan Heng's design, we can spot a recurring flower that can be found in his UI, attack animations, waist, back, sleeves, and coattails. This flower is called the lotus flower. In many Eastern cultures, the lotus holds a great symbolic weight and is considered one of the most sacred plants in the world. For the Egyptians, the flower encompasses the universe. In the Hindu culture, it is said that gods and goddesses sat on thrones of lotuses, and a long-standing Buddhist story states that Buddha himself appeared atop a floating lotus, and his first footsteps on earth left lotus blossoms. But what exactly makes this flower so special? The answer lies in the way it blooms, because the lotus has a life cycle unlike any other plant. You won't find this flower in sunny fields or misty mountains. Rather, you would have to go to swampy, dirty, and often unpleasant waters to find the lotus. And with its roots lashed in mud, it submerges every night into river water and miraculously reblooms the next morning, sparkling clean without any stains. Not only does this flower find sanctuary in the most unlikely places at night, but due to the waxy protective layer of its petals, its beauty is completely unblemished whenever it reblooms every single morning. It continues to resurrect itself over and over, re-emerging just as beautifully as it was last seen. It refuses to accept defeat as it fights with a will to live, and it serves to remind us that beauty can emerge from even the ugliest of places. Dan Feng, the previous incarnation of the Imbibitor Lunae, may have left behind an ugly and suffocating legacy, but that does not determine who Dan Heng is as a person. No matter how murky the water may be, the lotus will bloom. And no matter how difficult the journey will be, Dan Heng will blaze a path of his own. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Fashion Gazette. Now I leave the floor to you. Tell me your favorite things about Dan Heng down in the comment section below. Like the video so that the algorithm might notice me senpai, and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you would like to see more character design breakdowns from me in the future. That's all from me, the starward Crusader, and my dear viewer, may your journey lead you ever starward.